Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam, and this is episode 4 of Touchdown Talk. Before we begin, I just want to lay some ground rules. Number one, subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, share it around, and keep the live chat active because when we reach the end of this video, there will be a Q&A session. And if you have any questions, we'll be going from the top of the comment section to the bottom and answer as many questions as we can in the short period of time reserved for your questions at the end. However, this is where I get to number 2. If you have a question and you want it to be answered immediately or within a few minutes, few seconds of you posting it, you can post a super chat, and after we are done with whatever we're saying, not the topic, but just with our words or sentences or phrases, we will get to your super chat. And the only reason I decided to do this is because this channel's growing. In fact, April was a really successful month for College Football with Sam. Almost 300 gained subs, much more money. I'm not going to disclose how much, but much more money than per usual in a preseason month, and a lot more views and watch time. So as this channel grows, I can't interact with all of you, sadly, because I'm not omnipotent and omnipresent. I'm not God. So, yeah, that's just a way to make things simpler while also keeping everyone engaged. And today we have DJ on. And DJ is a former college football player who played with Steve Clinkscale, or for, rather, Steve Clinkscale, when Clinkscale had his first college football coaching job at Ashland University. And he's pretty knowledgeable about Ohio State and much of the college football world, having played in the sport and also being very interested in it. So, how are you, DJ? And if there's anything I missed, please introduce yourself further.
I'm doing good. You ain't missing anything. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, yeah, DJ, big time Ohio State fan. I'm obviously a Michigan fan. I felt it appropriate to, instead of wearing my College Football with Sam stuff, wear Michigan stuff for the day. It's also because some of my College Football with Sam stuff is dirty, but that's beside the point. We're going to talk about Michigan, Ohio State, the rivalry, important games for both teams, as I think that while with the 12-team playoff coming and with some other changes being made to the staffs and rosters of these two schools, I still think that this rivalry is very important and very critical this year, and I think it will be in the future. I know that last year was probably the last time that in 11-1 Ohio State will be left out of the playoff, and it would have been the same way for Michigan, but that doesn't, I don't think, change the importance of the game, especially when Ryan Day's 56-8 and people are talking about him as if he's like Brady Hoke in 2014 and this is the year where everything has to come together or he's fired. What do you think about that? We can actually start there. What do you think about Ryan Day's situation at Ohio State this season?
I've never been a fire Ryan Day type of guy, but I do believe he needs to win. He has to get it done this year in Columbus. Like, for his sake, I don't want him to lose, obviously, because I'm a fan, but Ohio State fan base can get real mean off of a Michigan loss. You lose 4 in a row, and holy, especially when they feel like Michigan lost a lot. I'm sorry. Especially when they feel like Michigan lost a lot, it can get real ugly for Ryan Day. I
Yeah.
apologize. Somebody was trying to call me.
No, you're good. Yeah, I mean, Michigan's 128th in returning production, and it hasn't been updated yet, but Michigan's only lost more to the portal. They haven't brought in more portal players outside of a great kicker from Arkansas State. I think last name of
Oh,
Zvada. but they haven't brought much in. Ohio State's brought more in, and they're, I think, 70th in returning production. But a lot of that's how returning production is measured in terms of total starters coming back. They have most of their starting 22 back from last year. I mean, I really sense that even though I don't think he's on the hot seat, I think that's what parts of the fan base want, but not what is the reality. I do sense that maybe for the locker room's sake, the players' sake, or the staff's sake, it's pretty critical that he wins this year. Even if a loss means he still makes the playoff or makes it to Indy or even wins it all. I mean, this game it's that important, I would say.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I remember in 2020 when I started this channel, and I wasn't disciplined with it at all in 2020 because Michigan sucked in 2020. And Michigan, I don't know if this is true or not, but it kind of does feel like they ducked Ohio State that year and just said, we're not going to play. I remember wanting Harbaugh to be fired unless he beat Ohio State. Now, he wasn't winning as much as they did, but for the average program to go 10-3 or 9-4 every year is incredible. So the expectations at these two schools, and I'd say particularly Ohio State, are very high. What do you expect out of them this fall, and what do you think some strengths and weaknesses of this team are?
I expect Ohio State to be the best team in the country. And I know people are going to be saying, well, he's biased, he's an Ohio State fan. But I think you can't name a better roster in college football or on paper. The strength is obviously the running game with Quinshawn Judkins, with Travion Henderson. Will Howard can run. The addition of Chip Kelly should do wonders for the running game. You got, 3 out of 4 returning offensive linemen plus the transfer from Alabama. That should help them. The weakness is still that offensive lineman. They need to find the right tackle. I don't love Josh Fryer. I think he can play, but I think he's more of a guard. You got to replace Marvin Harrison. Emeka Ibuka is really good, but outside of him, it's a lot of talent, but it's a lot of question marks. Is Carnell Tate ready to go? Is J.J. Smith the guy we've been hearing about? Can Brandon Ennis make an impact? Also, tight end, I feel like is the weakest spot on offense. Just don't think G. Scott is good. And there's no depth after it. I think the defense should be, if not the best defense in the country, top 3 right there with Michigan, Georgia, and Penn State, all those type teams. Secondary should be a strength on the defense. The linebackers got a lot of question marks, but I've been hearing good things about C.J. Hicks. Cody Simon is solid, but I'm not sure. He's not like a Junior Colson type of middle linebacker.
Yeah.
He's a solid college player. I think they need to find another safety. Ransom and Caleb Downs, but I'm not sure if Malik Harp. They like to run a lot of the 3 safety look. I'm not sure if Hartford ready to step in. Or can they just move Jordan Hancock to the other safety?
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
That actually is something that I read like somewhere. I forget exactly where, but that Jordan Hancock was splitting time at I think nickelback's the position. And in the 3 safety look, and I found that so interesting because he's more of a corner, and whether it's Jim Knowles in 2022 being overly aggressive, trying to bring the jack position into the Big Ten and it just not working, and playing with 3 safeties, and now 4 down linemen being much more conservative, And if Hancock's moved to that position, that's, in my mind, closer to 3 corners than 3 safeties, though I could be wrong. It really does feel like not only Jim Knowles has intentionally adapted to the Big Ten, but that he's taking what Michigan's defense has done for the past 2-3 years, where 4 down linemen, 3 corner look, moving away from Don Brown to more of an NFL conservative defense. I think that's a sign that Jim Knowles is an elite defensive coordinator. I think he's one of the best in the nation right now, and that the defensive staff is really good. For strengths of the overall team, I would probably say receiver. It's a question of who will replace Marvin Harrison Jr., but I thought Jeremiah Smith looked wide open in almost every play in the spring game. I think Ibuka, when healthy, is good. I think that running back, obviously, like you said, number 1 running back room in the country. Safety and corner, I think, are areas of strength, particularly corner, with Denzel Burke and also Caleb Downs there at free safety is potentially the best defensive back in the country. And he's a sophomore. He's not even eligible to go to the NFL. And weaknesses, I would say offensive line, but that's probably it. Maybe tight end, but I think that I don't know how much they'll use the tight end position. I know that Ryan Day is obviously no longer running the offense there. It's Chip Kelly, and I still need to familiarize myself more with Chip Kelly in that system that he's bringing over there.
I also forgot to mention they need a pass rush.
Oh, yeah.
It's been lacking. Like, D line is really solid, but there's no pure. Where's the Chase Young, Nick Bosa? Obviously, those are once in a generation type of talent, but somebody has to get consistent pressure without sending blitzes.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Like whether it was, it's so interesting that Michigan has been able to manufacture like pass rushes, or I think Penn State's probably the best example. Penn State's pass rush last year was incredible. It was the only it was the only pass rush, I think, that it was so lethal that they could shut down run games with their pass rush. Like that's how lethal it was. Their defensive tackles are more so the size of defensive ends, and they would just maul teams to death in pass rush. I don't know if they led the nation in sacks, but they were top 10 in sacks per game. Yeah, pass rush, offensive line, it's really still a question of the trenches. Like, can the trenches be elite? And if not, is the rest of the roster and staff and trenches good enough to win it all, or to at least beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and make a playoff run? That's probably the only scenario that doesn't include an undefeated season that I or you, or maybe you won't, call a success.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, the only seasons that I can find to be acceptable for Ohio State fans are probably winning it all, no matter what. That would even include a loss to Michigan. It'd be painful, but I know for a fact that on my end, if Michigan got humbled by Ohio State, but we somehow won it all, I would take that in a heartbeat. That's just how much a national title means. Or winning against Michigan, winning the Big Ten, and then making a playoff run, falling short, which would stink. But at least the Big Ten and Michigan are now back in Ohio State's hands, at least for the time being. A critical game to get to that point, though, very early in the year, way before Michigan, even before the Penn State game. It's probably going to be Ohio State's first game against a ranked opponent unless Iowa is ranked, and that's not a guarantee. Oregon. Ohio State doesn't just play Oregon, but they have to travel to Autzen Stadium in what is a hornet's nest, one of the loudest stadiums in college football. And Oregon last year was one of the most dominant teams in the country, despite losing to their rival Washington twice. Every win they had, except for Texas Tech, was thoroughly dominant. And they return a lot of their offense, even more of their defense, and they have the number 3 portal class coming in with Dylan Gabriel, Evan Stewart, Jamari Caldwell, a great defensive tackle from Houston. What does this matchup present to Ohio State? Like, what's favorable to the Buckeyes? What's unfavorable? And then who do you think will win here?
I think Ohio State should be able to control the offense, like the line of scrimmage. They should be able to run on Oregon. I'll be interested to see how the Oregon's passing game does against Ohio State defense. Because again, I'm really worried about the pass rush. I'm not sure if Ohio State can really get home against Dylan Gabriel. He can do things in the pocket where, like, not really a scrambler, but he can move.
Yeah.
That can put the DBs in a challenging position. It's hard to cover for 5 seconds, 6 seconds. So that'll be real interesting. I think, especially going to Oregon, if Ohio State can win that game, the confidence it'll give them going forward will be tremendous. With that said, I actually got Ohio State losing.
Really?
I don't think nobody's going undefeated. I think Ohio State will get them back later in the Big Ten championship, but I have them losing on the road at Oregon. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I for now disagree with that in the sense that I think Ohio State's winning, but after the portal window's closed, spring games are nearly over, I'm going to go back and rewatch some spring games I have watched ones that I haven't even thought of yet, and review depth charts. If there's one game that I'm going to pick Ohio State to lose to in the regular season, it's either Oregon or Michigan. And with Oregon being on the road, it's probably not going to be a team that Ohio State focuses on as much. And Oregon, I watched their spring game. They're nearly as physical as Michigan, except they actually have they have diversity on offense. I mean, Michigan right now probably couldn't pass effectively against teams with a secondary that is at an Iowa or Ohio State level. Like, even if you threw in play action or they were running everywhere, it would be hard. It would be a challenge with Alex Orji and a wide receiver room that only has like 6 scholarship receivers right now. Oregon's receiver room is deeper. They return probably the best offensive tackle duo in the country in Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly Jr. And like you said, Gabriel isn't exactly a scrambler, but he can run, and he's very experienced. He's accurate. And in my mind, he's the perfect game manager. And putting him behind that offensive line with a running back room that includes Jordan James, includes Noah Whittington, and they have a young running back whose name I forget, but he played well in the spring game. He was highly recruited. And that defense of Oregon's, with how much they return, they have a pass rush. I don't think their defense will be as good as Ohio State's, but they have a pass rush. And while I think Ohio State wins for now, I look at how Oregon can probably match up well against Ohio State's offensive tackles. I think Oregon has the better offensive line. And Oregon probably has, I wouldn't say the higher ceiling at quarterback or the deeper quarterback room, but I would say if Will Howard and Dylan Gabriel are the starting QBs, then Oregon does have an advantage at QB too. And having an advantage at skill position offensively and in the trenches and home field advantage is pretty huge, I would think. So this will be a tough game for sure. And for my viewers watching, don't be shocked if I pick Ohio State to lose this game in my next round of Big Ten predictions. I think the matchup's favorable for Oregon, and it's a tough place for Ohio State. I mean, this is going to be in a string of games that I would say even includes Penn State, which is the game I want to talk about right now, where Ohio State's just going to be facing physical team after physical team. Do you think, though, that Penn State is... Do you think that they're physical in their identity?
I think they want to be, but like the defense, Penn State, which they're going to have a great defense. Great pass rush, some safeties, corners that can play, linebackers that can play. But Drew Allen's not that good. It looks like he's regressing. You still got James Franklin there, if Ryan Day is getting any type of criticism, Franklin should be gone.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Like, I just don't see Ohio State losing to Penn State with James Franklin.
I respect that opinion.
Especially when I feel like they got the clear better team. But it's in Happy Valley.
Yeah, it is in Happy Valley. Yeah. Penn State hosts Ohio State, and it's in October, so I think Penn State could make this their whiteout, and probably will.
Fox will have the game, so it should be at 12. So that should hurt a little bit, Penn State.
Yeah.
And last time they went to Happy Valley, it was tough, but Penn State got to show me.
Understandable. Look, James Franklin has never, ever beaten a top 10 team that either Jim Harbaugh or Ryan Day has coached. And by top 10, I don't just mean like at the end of the season, I mean ranked. This is even including like 2018 Michigan, who got blown off the field in their final 2 games. This is including some Ohio State teams who were like top 10 to finish the year and top 10 in rankings at the time, but they weren't as good as even some of these recent Ohio State teams that have faced criticism, like 2018 Ohio State. They finished the end of the year strong, which is good, and that's what matters. But for much of the season, they were inconsistent, and that was a team that fielded a worse defense than probably every one of Ryan Day's teams outside of the 2021 team. Franklin just can't win big games. And the matchup isn't as favorable. You still have the fact that with Ohio State's questions at offensive tackle, any team with a good pass rush matches up well with them there. But Ohio State's guard play should improve with Donovan Jackson coming back. If Fryer shifts in at guard, he reminds me of Carson Barnhart at Michigan, where they have the size to play guard, and they're just off at tackle. So the worst you can do is try, and it should fit. That should work. And if it doesn't, I think Ohio State has at least someone who can play at a serviceable level at guard. How do they match up with Penn State's interior defensive line, which has struggled at times over the past few seasons? And Penn State has questions at secondary. I mean, they have deep questions at corner. A.J. Harris is projected to start there. He's an incoming transfer from Georgia. But he's going up against a wide receiver room that's one of the best in the country. And Penn State's offense has questions. Their offensive line, their receiver room, who lost their leading receiver in Keandre Lambert-Smith. And Aller, there's no guarantees that he's going to get much better than he is right now. I have this pegged as a loss for Penn State, and I'm honestly more likely to choose Michigan to beat Ohio State on the road than I am Penn State to beat Ohio State at home, which I wouldn't have held that opinion about a month or so ago. But here I am.
I feel like maybe if the receiver would have stayed, maybe, but Drew Aller just doesn't look good.
No. No, he doesn't. And Lambert Smith, as much as he's not elite, he's just a good receiver. There's no guarantee that Fleming is going to have a breakout season. I mean, he has to stay healthy. And that's, unfortunately for him, that's been an area of inconsistency, is his health.
And he will drop an easy ball here and there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can block.
Yeah, I wouldn't know that. But you would. Next up, I want to talk about Michigan. What do you think about Michigan entering this year?
I feel like the defense is elite. They got the best two defensive tackles in the country, bar none, as a tandem. They got the best corner, hands down. Safety play should be good. Secondary in general, losing DJ Waller hurts. I understand a lot of Michigan people. Feel like that wasn't that much of a loss, but DJ was going to, if he wasn't going to start, he was the third corner.
Yeah.
That's a blow. Front seven should be good. They still got Stewart is back. Moore. I'm not sure about the linebackers that much.
Yeah, they lose both of them.
I know Michigan's going to be physical. Alex Orji, can he throw? Can he throw good enough and consistent enough to win at that level? Who's the receivers? Who's the playmaker? I like Morris. He's still on the team? I'm not really sure. I remember Morris as a recruit.
Yeah, Tyler Morris is still there. He had a big catch in the Rose Bowl where he was outrunning Alabama defensive backs. He's probably going to be the best wide receiver this year.
Then you got Samaje, the freshman.
Yeah, Samaj Morgan.
I think he should have he's definitely gonna have a big role. Loveland, probably the best tight end in the country, or arguably top 5. Donovan Edwards, we all know he's a star. But it comes down, can Orji and the receiving core do enough to beat elite teams? I know they can beat the Iowas, the Penn State, the Wisconsins of the world. But can they beat Texas in a shootout?
Yeah. That is an area with those games and the ability to have an offense. And look, last year's offense was a near elite offense, but to be fair to, I would say, myself and my preseason predictions last year, and the fact that Michigan had several offensive linemen drafted or go into free agency. Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson were drafted pretty high. Same with Blake Corum. That offense had a lot of potential to it. I mean, they could last year, and maybe I'm incorrect in saying this, they could have been one of the best offenses in the country with all they had coming back and with the playmakers and weapons that they had. I mean, they could have had an elite offense paired with that elite defense. And
I agree.
I mean, at times they did, but they really didn't. They really had just this near elite offense that was a balance between good and just getting by, and then great third down conversion through the air and moments where they looked unstoppable, but not actually playing to that level.
I feel like
Oh no, you're good.
I feel like with that it's just based on Harbaugh playing it like an NFL. Like if you watch NFL games, a lot of them come down to like a possession or two. It don't the offenses don't really open up.
Yeah.
And Harbaugh kind of used Michigan that way. It was more of a style of play. They had the players, but it just wasn't. They didn't play that way.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, even looking at the Penn State game last year where Michigan just ran every play except for one in the second half. Now that wasn't Harbaugh, that was Sharon Moore, but still the overall style of play of like game management, game control, be conservative. And that's something that I like, but I would also like to see Michigan, like you said about Texas, can they engage in a shootout? Now, I would never like to see an opposing team score 40 or more than that on my team, but you can't field elite defenses every year, or if you do, you're certainly an outlier. I think that Michigan's strengths are going to be trench play. I think their trench play will be the best combined, like combining the offensive and defensive line in the country. I think that linebacker will overall be an area of strength. I think that starting corner will be an area of strength. Depth is a weakness. That's with much of Michigan. I think depth is their weakness at probably every position except for running back and defensive line. Tight end's an area of strength too, and I would say running back. An area that I feel neutral on overall is probably safety. I mean, Zeke Berry should step up, and Quentin Johnson and Makari Page come back. But Rod Moore being injured just hurts, and I don't think he'll be back in the regular season.
I forgot Rob Moore got hurt.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. He tore his ACL in like a non-contact injury. It's like I think that's what happened to Cooper DeJean at Iowa. Like he tore something in practice, not even in a game, but just in a weekly practice in the regular season. And weakness, I think, is receiver, just with the lack of depth, lack of a clear, experienced playmaker. There's no Roman Wilson. There's no Cornelius Johnson, no Ronnie Bell. Tyler Morris, I think, is probably going to be due for a good year, but there's still questions. And I would say depth in the secondary, depth pretty much everywhere. Quarterback, a lot of questions there. I don't think there's any player who's capable of being better than good, and they can certainly play at a below average or even bad level if they're not developed and managed properly there. What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the team? And where do you see them finishing the season? There are people who think this team will go 8-4 or 9-3 or potentially even worse, and I disagree with that. I think while they're not the best team in the Big Ten or they won't have the highest ceiling, I do think that they're going to finish in that double-digit win area.
I understand the people that say 3 losses, so they probably feel Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. I tend to think they're going to lose 2 out of them. I think they're going to beat one of them 3 teams. The strength is the running game. It's just overall being physical. Like Orgy might not be a great passer, but he's good enough to win games in college.
Yes.
Get physical with teams, run the ball. If you got to go old school Nebraska, do what you got to do to win. Like I said, I'm gonna keep harping on the loss of DJ Waller. I'm biased. I'm not gonna lie. I think the kid's gonna be a superstar in college. Not too many corners 6'4" that can move the way he can move. I think losing him really hurts. In today's football, where you gotta have as many cover guys as you can get, that's gonna hurt. When you play in teams like Oregon, Ohio State, USC, I mean, I'm not sure how physical USC is, but that can open it up. that can't throw the football. That could be a struggle.
Oh yeah. And I mean, even if USC isn't physical, I mean, this is the thing. Non-physical teams, if they have enough skill talent, can beat and at times even destroy teams who are more physical than them because they just overwhelm them to death. I mean, that's what Alabama did to Georgia in 2021. Georgia was by far and away the more physical and dominant team. Alabama just overwhelmed them until they suffocated. That's that's why that's why skill position talent matters. That's also why Big Ten teams haven't won it all, typically, is because they only focus on being physically tough, and then they can get easily overwhelmed by teams who say, okay, it's cool that you have NFL offensive linemen, but we have something called a 4-4 wide receiver who has length and can like catch the ball, and a quarterback, more importantly, who can throw and can throw anywhere.
Can I touch on something?
Of course.
You said 4-4 wide receiver, and the kid that Michigan just got out the transfer portal, C.J. Charleston.
Oh, from Youngstown State.
He's not. I know a lot of people are like, well, he's from Youngstown State. He's a smaller school guy. He's gonna work himself into the rotation. The kid he's pretty good.
I'll have to watch. I'll have to watch some of his film. I didn't even know that we received a commitment from him.
And he runs a legit 4-4.
Oh wow. Well,
And he's a pro as well. Like not pro far as the way like his ability, but he's a pro in the way he carry himself off the field. When it comes to working, studying, he's gonna do all the right things.
yeah. Well, we need help wherever we can get at receiver because that C.J. Charleston coming in makes our receiver room only 7 deep with scholarship players. I mean, it's absolutely nuts how many receivers left. And it shocked me toward the end because I'm thinking there's only 6. Like, can't you find your way in the rotation? Because I know that Michigan will occasionally go 4 or 5 wide. I mean, sometimes you have to. And they might have to against a team like Texas, whose secondary was not good last year and didn't look good this season either in the spring game. Like, don't get me wrong, Arch Manning is a good player, but his statistics in watching that spring game is one of the few non-Big Ten spring games that I watched. Their secondary is not good. It reminds me a lot of whether it's Ohio State's secondary in 22, Michigan's in 20, Michigan State's basically every year of the Mel Tucker era. They have no discipline. They can't cover. I'm watching guys diving for the ball like it's a video game character glitching, and they're not a minute, but like they're a few seconds early. Like they're diving, ball's still way in the air, receiver catches it, touchdown. And Texas losing their defensive tackles too stinks. Their defense might be in a rough position, but they return so much of their offense. They got Quinn Ewers back, most of their offensive line. They lost most of their other skill players, but they've been recruiting at a very high level. And they got Isaiah Bond and Silas Bolden and Nyblack in the portal at receiver and tight end, respectively. What do you make of Texas traveling to Michigan? I mean, it's a week 2 game. Both teams should be undefeated. If they're not, then one of them's absolutely terrible. What do you think of that? I mean, these teams are kind of opposites in a way, but they should theoretically be strong in the trenches as well, at least by recruiting and what history has shown us.
I think it's a battle of styles. Whichever team can force their style upon each other first. Like, can Michigan win the physicality part? Can they run Donovan Edwards, or is Texas going to be able to get out there with Quinn Ewers throw the football all over the field. I should actually be in attendance of that game. I can't wait for it.
Oh, really? You have tickets?
You know, my nephew played for Michigan, so that's one of the games I'm definitely trying to make.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'll be a great game, I think. Texas at Michigan. It's a game that Joel Klatt has certainly highlighted, and it's a game that I obviously think is important, and it probably is the most important game for Michigan outside of the game at Ohio State. In fact, some might say this game is even more important because Ohio State's at the end of the year. Yes, it's a rivalry game, and I think it's going to be the most important game. But I'll listen to someone who thinks that Texas is more important because it's game two, and Michigan can lose all of their momentum right here if Texas comes in and wins dominantly. I don't think
That makes
that's
sense. I'm sorry. That makes sense. You win that game. If you Michigan, the confidence you get for winning the game like that, I
yeah.
understand.
Oh yeah, that would be a huge, humongous confidence boost. I think that this is probably out of Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State, out of Michigan's three biggest games, I think this is probably the easiest matchup by a mile. Not saying this is an easy matchup, but Oregon and Ohio State are much better positioned to stop the run, and I would say also to defend the pass. They have much better defenses theoretically than Texas does, and they'll probably have better offenses too. Just looking at returning
All right.
production and their returning experience at receiver, running back, etc. And the fact that, quite frankly, I just think Day and Lanning are better than Sarkisian as a head coach. I really think that. This game, if I was to compare what I think will happen here to past Michigan games, I'd say this game has a decent chance to turn into what Michigan Penn State was in 2022, where Michigan can just run every other play or 2 out of 3 plays and just gash Texas over and over and over again. I don't think it'll be that bad because that was Penn State, and that Penn State offense was much worse than this Texas offense should be. But like you said, styles make fights, and I think the style totally favors Michigan in this type of game. Of course, Edwards has to run. He has to be more patient than he was last year, and the line has to be physical, and they have to be tough. And Michigan's defense, the secondary has to hold up because Texas will have a good passing offense. And Texas can help alleviate that pressure in the run game and compensate for a poor defense if Michigan's secondary is not up to par.
I agree. Do you
USC.
think
Oh, no, you're
real
good.
do you think Will Johnson would travel more, especially with losing Mikey? Like if playing against Texas and Isaiah Bond is on the inside, you think they'll move Will inside?
Uh, I don't necessarily know, but seeing that he's the best defensive back by a mile on the team, I imagine they'll want to move him around. Um, that's unless they have faith in all the other secondary players, which they could, but they'll want to rotate in that position like they always have. And I don't think they have the depth to rotate at that position and not have at least a weak link or two in the unit. But that's just my opinion. I'm by no means like a coach on that type of on that stuff. They'll have to, I think, play a similar style against USC that they play or are gonna play against Texas. I think that USC and Texas are built similarly outside of the fact that Texas should have a much better offensive line, and I think USC at skill position is more proven. I think Miller Moss will be better than Quinn Ewers, and I think that USC's receiver core while they may not have a better individual player than Isaiah Bond, I think their starting lineup overall just is better with what.
I do think I think the Branch kid could be a breakout player.
Oh yeah, yeah. Great punt returner, special teams player, but he didn't play that much on the offense. Is there anything else you think to look at for USC, like any other players or the team overall?
Um, I think Michigan should be able to beat USC pretty handily. Until USC got to show me they can play defense, and until then, I'm not ready to put them up there with actual playoff type teams.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And even with them bringing in a new defensive staff, Lincoln Riley bringing in like Doug Belk from Houston, bringing in D'Anton Lynn, the biggest addition from UCLA, just poaching their rivals DC, Eric Henderson from the NFL. They hired North Dakota State's head coach as a linebackers coach. I mean, that's how invested they are in improving the defense. But even Jim Knowles, it took him more than a year to write the defense. And I don't think that USC is just going to have this great defense in year one of that new staff. Especially because of the fact that they're moving to a conference that is all about interior trench play, or just trench play in general. USC's strength on defense is their secondary. Their secondary looked really good in the spring game, disciplined, great at tackling, better at picking off the ball. Like, they forced turnovers, which, despite that being a staple of Alex Grinch defenses, they couldn't even do that last year. That's how bad their defense was. They couldn't even do the things that they're designed to do in whatever that mess of a defense has been since Alex Grinch was at Ohio State and then went to Oklahoma and then USC. I agree with you. I think that Michigan should beat USC pretty handily. I think SC's offense will present some challenges to the secondary. It might be the best passing offense that Michigan faces all year. It may also not, but it has the capability of being the best passing offense that Michigan plays. And SC has, I think, good enough coaching. More importantly, or more truthfully, good enough talent to compete. But I see Michigan running over them. I see Michigan's defense working that offensive line and probably forcing USC into being one-dimensional. USC by no means is even like a 2021 Ohio State or, I mean, yeah, they I don't know what the term is. They're close, but they're also very far away in my mind. They could prove me wrong this year, but that's what it feels like for them entering 2024.
Same here. But like you said, they're gonna need to get adjusted to the new conference. It's gonna take a while.
Yeah. I even say the same thing for Oregon. Even though I think Oregon is going to come in here and compete immediately, I do think there will be moments and games where you will watch Oregon play and you will say, "Oh, yeah, they're still trying to figure this conference out." It's actually, you bringing up the Pac-12 and the conference change is a great segue, because I want to talk about Oregon at Michigan now. You said you have Oregon beating Ohio State. I'm assuming you're having them beat Michigan, and that would be very understandable. Are you? And what do you think of, like, what do you think of this game? What do you think the style and the matchup is here?
I do have Oregon beating Michigan. I think it's gonna be similar to like how Ohio State. Well, I might be giving away but how I think Ohio State is gonna beat Michigan. I think the top end talent is gonna overwhelm it eventually. I'm gonna show quarterback play. Dylan Gabriel. Wow, I don't know if he's gonna be super special, but he's gonna do enough.
Yeah.
So I have Oregon winning.
Yeah, and that defense too. I watched that spring game for Oregon, and I've never viewed Tosh Lupoy as this elite defensive coordinator. And Lanning is a defensive genius, but he's taken a CEO role. Like I don't think he's calling the defensive plays. I'm pretty sure he isn't. If I'm wrong, please correct me. It's hard to keep
I'm
up
not
with
sure.
every program, but I try my best. And like whether it's from you or whether it's from anyone commenting right now or watching this live, or even when it's not live and uploaded on YouTube, please correct me if I'm wrong on like anything, and I'll try and fix it, or at least learn from it so I don't get it wrong in the next stream or the next video. But I'm pretty sure Lanning doesn't call defensive plays. He's taken a very CEO role, which is good. It's very good. I think it's something that Sarkisian is going to have to learn, and that's something Ryan Day has, I think, finally learned this year by taking a step back from the offensive play calling.
I
I'm
love that actually. I felt like sometimes, especially last year, Ryan Day got tight. Like if Cal McCord threw an interception or something, he become predictable.
yeah, I like last year the play calling was so it's just it didn't make any sense in my mind. Notre Dame, that game was an example of it. The Penn State game, like in big games outside of the Michigan game, I actually thought that Ryan Day called the Michigan game pretty well, and a lot of people will disagree with that, but I think he did, given what he had in his roster and in his team. But the Penn State Notre Dame game and many games early in the season, it's like, what are you doing? Like this team is not. It's obvious to anyone watching, even from a TV screen. This team is not designed for power running. And what are they doing? They're like diving into the guards, and the guards are like not even blocking correctly. Throw the ball. So
It was a head scratcher.
yeah, um, it's really good that Day has done that. He's taken the CEO role. Lanning has certainly done that. I, before the spring games, like making my it was really pre-transfer portal, pre-spring game, Big Ten predictions. It was already spring for about a month there, so I wouldn't call it pre-spring predictions. But like my first round of spring predictions, I picked Michigan to win this game. I see that being less and less likely, in all honesty. Like, I look at how Oregon is nearly as physical as Michigan. Yes, they probably won't have as good of a defensive line. They may not even have as good of an interior offensive line. But they're deeper at every position than Michigan is, except for defensive line. Even at secondary, while I think Michigan is better starters, Oregon can have a guy or two go down, and their quality of play in defending the pass won't drop that much. For Michigan,
Uh,
you have Will Johnson go down. Well, your secondary is probably like above average, good, maybe great in a miracle world. It's bad in the worst case. And Oregon, like you said, better quarterback play, better receiver play. I think I picked Michigan to win this game because Oregon does have questions on the interior of that defensive line. They do have some questions in pass rush. And their offense, while good and explosive and also physical, they can be overly aggressive, and it comes to bite them back in the butt. And I see this especially in their big games. Like against Washington last year, they tried to be aggressive, and it killed them, especially in the first game. Last 2 years ago, actually, against, I forget if it was Oregon State. I think Oregon led by 2 or 3 possessions, but they tried to go for it on every fourth down that they could in opponent territory, and they failed on all of them. And it just gave the other team, it gave them enough time and enough wiggle room to end up pulling it off. Oregon State came back and won that. And I just think that Michigan has superior game management and probably better overall trench play. But I'm really questioning that now after watching the spring game, looking at the roster, and even talking to you right now. Like, I don't feel like that's a fair pick to pick Michigan over Oregon. But it will be one of Oregon's tougher games, maybe toughest game, because it is on the road. It'll be later in the season, so a little bit of a weather change. And again, this will probably be the most physical matchup in the Big Ten. I would expect it to be.
I can see that.
Yeah, it'll be a battle of trench play. This game will, and I could see what you said coming to fruition with Oregon being equal or close to Michigan in the trenches, but far superior at skill positions, and they just eventually break them. I mean, all it takes in a game like what this one looks like is one big play, and everything's just thrown off. And now I think we're here. We're at Michigan and Ohio State. Ohio State's lost to Michigan 3 years in a row. First and foremost, what do you think about, I just find this so interesting, with the whole Michigan cheating scandal, how do you view the past 3 years?
Personally, I don't care about it. Michigan won. I feel like that's a lot of Ohio State fans trying to make themselves feel better for losing. Did it help them? Probably, but at the same time, stop somebody. Like Donovan Edwards ran wild on them 2 years ago. What's the running back? Couple years, like but the year before that.
Oh, Hassan Haskins, and also Blake Corum with a bum leg.
That's like, yeah, well, like I guess it'd be cool as an Ohio State fan. I want to come back to that, but we lost. I don't really care much about that cheating stuff. I even last year I felt like while Ryan Day didn't call a horrible game, I also felt like he was coaching not to win. Like Sharon Moore went for it every fourth down. I'm trying to win this game.
Yeah, exactly. Like fourth and short, convert. Fourth and short, convert. The first one was a fourth and goal.
Right, like they when he settled for the field goal before halftime, that's a long field goal, especially at Michigan. Try to win this football game.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so interesting because I don't think he just called an average game. I thought Ryan Day called a good game against Michigan. But I'm not going to end it there because I also think that last year's loss to Michigan in particular, the previous 2 seasons was a bad matchup. There were games where Michigan had this massive matchup advantage, this massive physical advantage that Ohio State just couldn't overcome. Even though and I mean literally, every power ranking system agrees that Ohio State had the better team in 21 and 22. Michigan just had this massive matchup advantage in the trenches and I think called the better individual game. Now I think that especially in 22, I think that Michigan, despite what the power rankings say, had a better team overall. But we'll never know that because they only play so many games, they play different opponents, and they only play each other once. They don't play each other in a 7-game series like they do in the NBA playoffs. But last year, Ohio State has their head coach. They're unified. They're healthier than they were in 22 by a mile. I don't know if they were healthier than when they were in 21. They finally eliminated much of those matchup disadvantages with a better defense. And while they didn't have an elite ground game or even a great one, Michigan's run game wasn't as good either as it should have been and as it was in previous seasons. and yet Ohio State lost. And it was I think the snowball effect of Ryan Day, in a certain sense, overreacting to the previous two losses and not changing his staff soon enough and making some recruiting misses, and also the strength and conditioning staff. Like, all of that just snowballed. And by the time that Ryan Day called a good game, and by the time that Ohio State played to their potential against a really good team, they fell short. Because Michigan, for the first time, I think, in, I don't know how long, probably for the first time since like the 90s or the early 2000s, like pre-Jim Tressel or the first years of Tressel, actually had a team that on paper, along with on the field, on paper, was just better than Ohio State. Like, they were the better team.
I think Michigan was the better team last year, but I don't really know. Like, it was close.
Yeah.
I do think a couple of matchups. I think Eichenberg, Michigan found a matchup where they can exploit with Eichenberg and the tight ends. He was getting ate alive. The line. I mean, even with that, Marvin Harrison was wide open. I mean, not wide open, but he was open on the play
Yes.
where Cal McCord threw the last pick. Who knows? Trust me, I was there, and I still see. I saw the whole play develop. Just it'll never. I don't know. It hurt.
Oh yeah, and it was close, and it was close. It was close because, to his credit and to the staff's credit, they made changes. They did the necessary things to better compete in the Big Ten and to try and beat Michigan. And that's probably what makes it more painful, is they did what they needed to do, but it was too late. Or Michigan just improved themselves and was able to match up well. I remember that final drive, like that you were talking about. I was scared. A part of me thought that they were just going to march down the field.
I came away from that game thinking, if Ryan Day would have picked J.J. McCarthy over Cal McCord, Ohio State win the game. That's where the difference. I mean, J.J. McCarthy made a couple of plays in that game, whether he extending, throwing it across his body to Cornelius Johnson. He did just enough. And that's where the teams really matched up at. Like, if J.J. was the quarterback at Ohio State win the game. I truly believe that.
Yeah. If Ohio State last year is able to retain C.J. Stroud through NIL, they probably win it all. Like, despite having that O-line look that way and the run game that they had. I mean, they came that close, and they were better than what anyone's going to remember them as because of that Missouri game. But that Missouri game truly wasn't that team. Just like
I don't even think so.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think? Like, losing all they lost?
The Missouri game, I think we wanted to win, but like once you lose your starting quarterback, third series of the game, anybody that is not trying to troll will understand.
I can see that. Like I thought that game was disappointing because Ohio State has such a talent advantage that they had no business losing that game. But that's also, like, you can also say at the same time that they weren't as good in the Missouri game as they were on average in the regular season due to roster changes. What do you think of this year's Michigan-Ohio State game? Walk me through what you think the key matchup will be, how you think the game will go, and I know you're picking Ohio State to win, but how do you think Michigan can find a way to win this game?
I think make it an ugly game. Make Ohio State start getting tight. Maybe some of the last 3 years start creeping in their mind. That's how Michigan wins. I think the longer you draw, like make it a ugly 7-0, 10-7 type game, doubt creeps into Ohio State, creeps into Ryan Day's head. Like maybe we are soft. Maybe I mean I don't want to never call a football player soft, so let me not do that. But some of those whispers start getting loud. I'm not sure. Like I think if Ohio State can find a way to jump on them early, I think they can. It'll be good. But the tougher the game is, the more I can see people making mistakes. They short arming catches that they usually make. You know, linemen not doing what they're supposed to do because they worried about, oh man, here we go again. It's kind of like in March Madness when you got the underdog and they say like if you don't get rid of them early, the longer the game is in question, the more doubt creeps in. I feel like that's how Michigan wins. The longer the game is in question, the longer the game you hitting them, making it an ugly game, the more Ohio State going to be. Oh man, they're going to be in their head.
I think that's a genius analogy. And I obviously have no clue what Michigan will look like this year. It's the same with, like, well, some clue, but you can only get so far with guessing a team from the preseason. But I do think in Michigan's most likely way of like going 12-0 again is they get in a bunch of close games with teams that they're more physical than, and they just win all those games. Like kind of in the way that
Agreed.
TCU did in 2022, or like what you talked about, like a Cinderella team, or maybe a team that isn't seated high but they have talent and they keep pulling off upsets, like what UNC did in Hubert Davis's first year.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think if Michigan makes it an ugly game, not just they have a good chance to win, but they'll if Michigan is to if this game is going to be ugly, I see Michigan most likely winning. But by ugly, I mean super low scoring. I think if it's close, but it's like a shootout, or there's enough back and forth, I think that Ohio State having more accuracy at quarterback, a deeper running back room, a better receivers, when you start having a close game that's higher scoring, you need how do I say this? Like you need the X factor players. If it's this low scoring affair and it's ugly, well that just it's not that it doesn't matter, but the X factor player hasn't emerged all game. It's not like he's going to emerge now because it's a game full of mistakes. It's like Alabama and Auburn in the Iron Bowl last year. The 4th and 30 was converted not just because Jalen Milroe and Isaiah Bond were great, but because Auburn made a horrendous mistake. Well, they were making horrific mistakes all game. That was
Agreed.
a snoozer. I think that Ohio State wins this game, though, and I've had a habit of picking Ohio State to win in the game when they shouldn't have. I picked them to win in 21 and 22, and Michigan did. I picked Michigan to win last year every time, like preseason, early regular season, and then by the time the game came around. And I see that even though I think Michigan is still the more physical team, Ohio State's physical. They're physical like they were physical last year, more physical than in 21 and 22. Just more the attitude, the defense, and I think the ground game. I mean, they have their best running back room that they've ever had under Ryan Day, because Judkins and Henderson combined are that talented, and they complement each other well. Henderson is pure speed and space, but he is not a person who breaks tackles. Judkins led the nation in broken tackles last year. I mean, that is the perfect duo. And I think, like
Agreed.
what you said, Ohio State just with better talent, home field advantage, and really wanting revenge and having more experience, everything outside of the overall trenches, everything goes Ohio State's way. And Ohio State is a much bigger matchup in perimeter and skill play against Michigan than Michigan does against Ohio State in trench play.
I completely agree.
What do you think the scoring range in this game will be? Like the total?
Uh, I think I'll give it like this. If Michigan gonna win, 24 and under. If Ohio State's gonna win, about 28 and over.
Ah, okay. So, like, just to get this clear, it's basically saying that like Michigan is the winner scores 24 less points than it would be Michigan if it's 28 or more. It's Ohio State, or is that just
Yeah.
like the total points?
If the winner, like you just said, if the winner scores 28 or more, it'll be Ohio State winning.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't think Michigan's offense is going to be much higher than mid 30s in average points scored per game. Like this will probably be Michigan's worst offense since, dare I say, even like 2020. Like maybe it's better than the 2021 unit, but the 2021 unit actually had weapons at receiver, and they'll probably have a better O line than they did this year, and probably a better passing QB too. I mean, I think Orgy has a higher upside than McNamara, but he's probably going to be more turnover prone, maybe more inaccurate. We'll see.
Okay.
Well, we've talked for an hour and 10 minutes about Michigan and Ohio State, which I think is incredible. These are Michigan's my favorite team. Ohio State, I'm a weird Michigan fan. Ohio State is actually one of my like more favored teams as well because I like good teams and I like good product. And Ohio State is not just good, but they're great. They're near elite. They're elite. But I think it's time to move on and do something that we talked about as our kind of side topic toward the end. And that is overrated and underrated teams. What I want to do is I'll mention the team, and then after mentioning the team, I want to get your take on that team in full first, and then I'll give some brief thoughts, and then we will move on to the next team. Before we get into that, though, everyone who's watching, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your questions in the chat. If you have a super chat, you can send it over, and we'll answer that as soon as we can in just a few seconds, or actually right now. But if you just want to ask a question, we'll try and answer it at the end of the video. But thank you all for that. And first and foremost, we have Clemson. What's your take on Clemson and Dabo Swinney?
I think Clemson is actually underrated going into the season. But I like the quarterback. I like the skill position players. They need to figure out what they're going to do at running back. The front seven should be solid. Getting Barrett Carter back was arguably the best linebacker in the nation. That was huge. I think they're going to be underrated.
Where would you put them in like a top 25?
Honestly, I'm going to go range because I haven't really just sat down and thought who should be ranked where
Yeah.
outside of like the top five. But I don't think they're top five worthy, but maybe back of the top 10 through 15 area, like 9 through 15.
Yeah. I it's so it's so interesting. I think they're a difficult team to gauge. I would trend towards saying towards disagreeing with you and saying overrated. But I mean, you said they have questions at running back. I mean, Phil Maffa is good at there. They hired new coaches on offensive line and defensive line, who I think should be improvements. That's Matt Luke at O-line, former Georgia O-line coach a few years back. And I forget who their D-line coach is, but he's worked there before, and he's pretty good. I'm just not a fan of Cade Klubnik, and their wide receiver room doesn't have enough depth, nor does their O line. But that's just my opinion. And for me, they're hard to read because they're in the ACC, which is a weak conference, and they're not using the portal, which stinks. But they still have a lot of talent, and they're recruiting at like a top 15, occasionally top 10 level. So you
I'm
s-
expecting Klubnik to take a major jump. When I say that, I should have probably preferenced that.
yeah, major jump. Do you think that's just because Garrett Riley's in his second year that he's going to take a major jump?
Yeah, I think just being used to being comfortable in the system.
Yeah, that's big, and that's a good point. I mean, they went from pro style to air raid. That's a pretty drastic move.
Right.
Yeah, and he didn't look good in the spring game, but there's also the fact that Clemson's defense is always well recruited, and they're well disciplined and they're well coached. I don't think they're as well coached as they were under Venables, but Venables was a genius there at defensive coordinator. So it's hard to go up from him or retain at that level. Um,
Right.
yeah. Do you think they'll win the ACC?
Yes, only because I'm not sure about DJU at Florida State. Well, no, take that. I like Miami. I forgot Ward went to Miami. So let me say, going to Miami. I'm just gonna say yes. I'm just gonna stick on the Clemson bandwagon right now.
Understandable. All right. Next team up, Georgia. What's your take on them?
I know a lot of people is gonna probably disagree with me, but I believe Georgia is overrated, and I'm rating them based on being the best team in the country. I don't see why Georgia is just like hands down the best team. No question. I get it. The offensive line is great. I get it. Carson Beck is probably arguably the number one quarterback in the NFL draft coming up. Him or Shador. Running back, we got to see. They got a couple of transfers that I like at receiver, but nothing really scare you on offense. Defense, they should be good. Mikel Starks is one of the best DBs in the country. They got Everett, but outside of them two, who you have? I know they got a bunch of 4 stars, 5 stars, but actual production. Williams on the D line should be real good. They got the D tackle back. I can't think of his name. The nose.
Is it Nazir Stackhouse?
Yeah, but other than that, like we're giving Georgia the benefit of the doubt because they're Georgia. Because Kirby Smart is Kirby Smart. But if we're basing this on actual return in production, what? Why is Georgia just better than Ohio State or Oregon or these other teams?
Yeah. Um I have them at number 1, but that is a fair question to ask, and I think the best answer I can provide is it looks like it's going to be a down year in football. That's probably the best answer that I could say. And because I view it as a down year in football, I mean, this is with me, I kind of just default. If it's going to be a down year, well, who's the best program? And right now that's Georgia. I mean, they recruit the best, develop the best, and they have the best head coach. But they do have questions, like in run defense. And their offense is great. They have several weapons, but they're probably just by design, by coordinator. I think even a Georgia fan would admit that it's more likely they'll have the best defense in the country than the best offense in the country, just given how they operate. Um,
Agreed.
yeah, they bring in
And I
Trevor.
respect.
Oh, you continue.
I'm sorry. I'm saying I respect saying because they've been the best program. So I respect that reasoning.
Yeah. Um, but it's like what you said. I mean, Georgia returns more production than Ohio State by rankings, but that's just because of how Bill Connolly how he measures all of that stuff, and he cares a lot about like Ohio State loses most of their passing yards offensively because Harrison's gone and Kyle McCord is
Over.
gone, and Georgia returns that stuff. But in terms of starters and in terms of veterancy, Ohio State does have like they have a big edge there. They return a lot more starters. And Georgia also loses, they lose Fran Brown. That was a pretty big loss. They brought in Tavarius Robinson from Alabama. And Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers was huge. We saw part of the reason Georgia wasn't in the playoff last year was because he wasn't fully healthy, and therefore he couldn't be targeted as much, and he wasn't as useful against a defense like Alabama's. And
Right.
Van Pran, good center, elite center actually last year, he's gone. And Amarius Mims, their tackle, who was taken in the first round of this draft. So I don't think there's any team. I think the point that I'm trying to make, and I think it's the point you're trying to make too, there's no team this year who enters without major questions. Not just questions, but like critical, major areas that could be doubted.
I agree.
Do you think that Georgia will win the SEC?
Oh man, I don't know. Because I actually really do like Ole Miss this year, and I felt like I'd be contradicting myself or stealing your answer by just saying yeah by default.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm gonna say yeah. I'm I'm gonna be on the fence on that one. I'm sorry.
No, 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 you're good. Ole Miss hosts Georgia, and Vegas's line on that's actually like Georgia by only I think 6.5. Like it's not even a double digit spread, which shocked me because Georgia annihilated them last year, and I included Ole Miss as some of my teams in this discussion. Um, we'll get to it, but I think you can already tell that I don't think Ole Miss is this elite team, but it is what it is. I don't think I don't think this year is going to be like 22 or 23 or in retrospect 21, where in 21 and 22 you had Georgia. In 22 you also had Ohio State and Michigan who were like uber dominant until Ohio State lost to Michigan and then Michigan lost to TCU. And I don't think you'll even have like last year where Michigan and Georgia as well, those were uber dominant teams. But then you had like several other teams like Washington, Oregon, Ohio State, who like were still really good at controlling games. I think this
Right.
year there's gonna be more chaos. Um, in a different way than '07 and 21, but still more chaos. And Georgia could fall victim to that chaos.
I can see that.
A team who can benefit, though, from chaos is Notre Dame. What's your take on Notre Dame?
If the quarterback from Duke can stay healthy, I actually like Notre Dame a lot.
Are they a
Uh,
playoff team?
I think they are. They're a playoff team. I think they're right there in the 5 through 8 range, especially if Riley Leonard can stay healthy. I love the defense. I love Xavier Watt. I think he's one of the most underrated safety. I know a lot of Caleb Downs and Mikel Starks get a lot of the pub, but Watts is really good. Ben Morris is if Will Johnson ain't the best corner, Ben Morris is arguably the best corner in the country. I
Yeah.
like what I mean. Marcus Freeman still though. I still worry about him still being a young coach. You always got to go through your growing pains, but I do like this Notre Dame team.
Yeah, I would say for Notre Dame, yeah, Watts and Morrison. I forgot Morrison came back. I forget the names of their defensive tackles, but both of them come back. They were rated very highly by Pro Football Focus. And oh, yeah, Jack Kaiser is back, I think, for his 6th year. He's pretty good at linebacker. My
Yeah,
biggest question for them isn't even Freeman, because I think that what Freeman is building through recruiting, the portal, and I don't know, I think that he can take the program to a level that Brian Kelly wasn't going to. Which is incredible given how Notre Dame's athletic leadership is stubborn and loves to be obsolete. Like, please just join a conference and reap the benefits already.
agreed.
My biggest concern for them is probably their defensive coordinator, Al Golden, who I think mismanages the talent that is placed on that defense. But Freeman, growing pains are natural, but 9-4 and 22 with a few bad losses last year. Every single one of Notre Dame's losses, Clemson, Louisville, Ohio State, those were all teams that finished ranked. There was no loss to Marshall, no loss to Stanford, which is just gross. None of that. And I agree with you. I think that they're a playoff team. I think that they might be slightly overrated, but that isn't really due to any preseason, like major preseason hype. It's more so due to the fact that, like, Michigan losing Harbaugh, so they get shifted back in the rankings now. I think they're a top 10 team. I want to watch their spring game and do more research. I don't know as much about Notre Dame as many of these teams, but I think they're top 10. And yeah, I mean, it's critical that Leonard stays healthy. But even if he isn't this awesome weapon, if they can get things right on defense, and if their O-line reloads like it has in the past, they can be like a mini Michigan and get to the playoffs and potentially do some harm in a down year.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. We're finally here. We're here at Ole Miss. Why do you like Ole Miss? And what do you think their chances are of winning a national championship?
I think I don't know. I think I like Ole Miss because I like Lane Kiffin. I like him as a coach, an offensive mind. I think part of it is I think I'm a little Alabama, Georgia fatigued, so I'm looking for somebody else. Um, I love Jackson Dart as a quarterback. I do think Walter Nolan can be, if he can live up to his recruiting ranking and his talent, potentially number one pick of the draft. He can really blow up. Um, if it ain't this year for Ole Miss, whenever will it be? More of one of them type of, if not now, when?
Yeah. Yeah, that I see that. Corn Crazed, last week's guest, pointed that out. He said that he thinks Ole Miss and Ohio State are actually in a very similar situation, and that shocked me. But then he told me because of how much they've spent on their roster and who they're bringing in, like, it is kind of a now or never thing. Not exactly the same as Ohio State, but there are some parallels to be drawn.
Right.
They avoid
Why do you,
Alabama. Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, no, I was about to say why you think they're overrated.
Oh, um, Lane Kiffin proved me wrong last year in beating Penn State and winning the amount of games that he did, and that's impressive. Um, I'm typically not a fan of the blue chip ratio. I mean, it's useful. It's been proven right. But I think that recruiting has been turned into almost an overrated part of the sport, which is sad because it is really important. Um, Ole Miss is recruited well. That actually the point that I was really trying to make is that Georgia, like a team like Georgia, just has so much more star talent And that combined with better coaching, I find a very hard time seeing like Georgia losing to Ole Miss in any way. Now, I think Ole Miss is top 15, probably toward the back of the top 10, so I still think they're really good. I just have a hard time seeing them with I have a hard time seeing them beating a Georgia. That's really what it is. And it'd be the same thing if they were in the Big Ten and playing Ohio State. I would look and I'd say, you can go 11-1, but when you meet up with that team that is that much more talented than you and has a better head coach and better coordinators, they have every advantage over you. Like, how are you going to compensate for that? Like, they have Jackson Dart's a good QB. Not good. That's being disrespectful. He's a great QB. Ulysses Bentley is a great running back. Their O-line should improve, and they have Trey Harris, who's an elite receiver. And they've brought in pieces on defense to be successful. But do all of those great pieces morph into an elite unit on either side of the ball? I guess I just have too many questions that I need to see answered. That's why I think at least they're overrated. But that's just my opinion.
Well, that makes sense.
Do you think they'll make the playoff? And if you do you think that, like, how far do you think they'll go or can go?
I think they will make the playoff, and I think they can make a run. I don't really want to get into who's going to win the national championship. I think that's too hard in a one game scenario. But like you said, they have elite pieces. They have elite talent. They can get hot. They can make a run.
Yep. I actually agree with that point. I think if they get in the playoff, they can be dangerous, especially if healthy. And with all those new transfers, they're only going to get better as time goes on, as team chemistry grows. What about Oregon? Overrated, underrated? What do you think?
I think at first I thought they was overrated when you first asked me a question. But the more I think about it, I want to say underrated. I like Dylan Gabriel I'm big on quarterbacks. In this sport, you got a good quarterback, and I think he can be an elite college quarterback. I'm not sure about NFL wise, but college wise, I think he can be elite. And if you got that, you got a shot.
Yeah.
They're physical, like you said. They can get after the quarterback. They have a big time corner that can go in and lock up with most teams number one. Evan Stewart can be electric. At first I thought Oregon was going to be overrated, but I think I'm talking myself into underrated.
I think that's smart. I think they're either underrated or properly rated.
Right.
Yeah. At the beginning of the preseason, I would have said overrated too. But their spring game and the depth they've had, I mean, I think they're better than Texas. And there's a shot that they could be the best team in the country. So with that, I agree. Underrated. What about Penn State? Another Big Ten team, a team that probably relates to Oregon or some of these new Pac-12 teams in the fact that Penn State under Franklin's traditionally been more skill position and speed centered rather than size and physical centered.
I think Penn State is overrated every year. I love Abdul Carter. Outside of him, to anybody on that team I could just say I love as a player? Not really. I mean, the running backs are solid, but I just keep looking at James Franklin.
Yeah. James Franklin. what is he, like 2-13 in top 10 games or something? It might even be 2-16. That might have been his record last year. And then like losing to Ohio State and Michigan this year, and Ole Miss may have brought it down. It's just, yeah. And I want to trust Franklin, and I say I want to because it's time for someone else to like compete with Michigan and Ohio State. And I actually think Penn State's underrated, but in the sense that they're rated too low. I'm not picking this team to win it all, and I'm not picking this team to win the Big Ten either. I think they can, but that's a big if. And that's basically saying everything else has to go right so that the team is fail proof, so that Franklin can't like screw it up.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, Abdul Carter, he's a beast, and he's going to defensive end, which I think is going to fit him really well. And Andy Kotelnicki is the best offensive coordinator in the country. He helped Kansas's offense become elite, so I imagine he can do that with Penn State's. But there are questions. And I could see this Penn State team, even with an easy schedule, finding ways with some of the questions they have to lose against teams that have inferior talent to them, at least via recruiting rankings. This is a pretty big year for James Franklin, wouldn't you say?
Completely agree.
Do you think that he's in a similar situation today? Like, not by the Penn State. Actually, yeah. Like, Penn State fan base and administration. Do you think he's in a kind of similar situation today?
I think so, yeah. But I also think he's in more dire. Like, I don't not 100% sure if Ohio State loses to Michigan, they will be fired. But I do believe if Franklin drops the ball against Ohio State, Michigan, I don't think Franklin coming back.
Yeah, they don't play Michigan this year. I mean, if
Um,
they like Wisconsin or like Washington, or they play USC, I could see if they lose a few of those games, which I think is possible, even though I'm not predicting it. I could see there being like serious talk of like pressure, especially with the 12-team playoff. If he misses that playoff, I mean, that fan base will be irate, and they should be. They have no business missing the playoff now that it's been expanded.
I agree.
We talked about Texas earlier in the Texas versus Michigan matchup preview. Do you think that Texas overall is over or underrated, like outside of that Michigan game?
I believe they're overrated. Like, I think they may have arguably the best left tackle in the sport, him or the kid from LSU. But like you said, the defense, their secondary was terrible last year, and it don't look better. How do you stop who? How can they stop somebody? I do like Ethan Burke, but outside of him, I don't love Texas. I think, especially when you're comparing them to the top of the sport, I think they're overrated.
I agree with you. I think they're one of the most overrated teams in the country, if not the most overrated team in the country. I think Ewers is inconsistent. They lose all of their skill position talent outside of him. And while they bring in transfers, I don't think they'll be as good at skill positions this year as last year. Their offensive line is good. They have great players, like you said, but they don't have that. They don't have that Oregon or Washington or Georgia or Michigan, like speaking from parts of last year or as last year as a whole. They don't have that type of O-line. And they lose Sweat. They lose Murphy. Their secondary was bad, and that's kind, and it will probably be similar this year. And they go to the SEC. And playing
Right.
Michigan early, playing Georgia, playing an SEC schedule, and then playing A&M at the end of the year, I don't think that. I don't know. Like Texas, high things should be expected of Texas. But to expect them to win it all or bust this year is ridiculous. And I think even expecting them to win the SEC in year one is ridiculous. Like, to just compete in the SEC should at least be like a thumbs up.
I agree.
Okay. And last but certainly not least, I'm just going to say that I think this team is underrated a lot. Utah. What do you think about them?
Completely underrated. I think Utah could be amongst the best 5 teams in the country.
Wow.
And they're in the Big 12. I don't see nobody beating them regular season.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um, they always find someone or some like a few teams to lose to randomly, but like from a purely paper perspective, I agree with you. I mean, on paper, I can't see them losing to like anyone, especially with Colorado not looking good in their spring game. Um, I don't think they play Kansas State. I forget their schedule, but their schedule's not hard. And it would take a team like Kansas or Colorado, like a team with good skill players, to beat a sound team like Utah. And I
Or
don't think.
maybe, I'm sorry, Oklahoma State, maybe.
Oh, that's a good point. I think they play Utah. Yeah, that's really good. If Ollie Gordon can have a big game against Utah, it would be hard for Utah to come back from a deficit like that. Yeah. So you think
But
they'll win the Big 12 and reach the college football playoff?
I think so. Also, I think they should be, they might get a bye. Might be in their first 4 teams.
Yeah, they would, unless somehow the Group of Five champion was ranked ahead of them, and I don't think that'll happen.
Me neither.
Yeah, I have them winning the Big 12 too, and I have them being a part of that bye week. It all depends on Cameron Rising. If Cameron Rising plays well, if the O line's good, if the defense reloads and in fact gets better, because last year they were banged up, and if they can find some sneaky skill position players, they can be a wicked team, especially now that they're in a
Agree.
weaker conference.
Agree.
All right. Well, thank you for talking about that, for those 8 teams, 6 provided by you, and 2, I just decided to throw in Ole Miss and Notre Dame there. I figured that they'd be interesting. What we'll do now is we'll look at the chat and we'll answer a few questions before getting off here. Okay. I just want to give a shout out to Chimichanga Guy, Kels14, LSU VS Far, and Armand Hammer. These are just a few subscribers of mine that have like been on this channel forever. Oh, Chris Lane too. Looking through all of these comments, just to find someone. Oh, Travis Shuttleworth. Is USC even the number 5 team in the Big Ten this year? I think Wisconsin, Iowa, maybe even Nebraska might finish better than USC this year. Am I crazy?
I don't think he is. I like Wisconsin. I think Pickle will have a solid team. But they got Van Dyke at quarterback.
Yeah, they got him from Miami.
If he can have a bounce back, I know he was pretty bad last year, but you add Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Michigan. I don't think USC is going to be top 5.
I don't either. And yeah, Travis, I don't think you're crazy. In fact, I think you've taken a pill. I think you've taken a pill of sanity. I think that after watching the spring game of USC and Nebraska, I'm gonna say it right now. I think USC is worse than Nebraska, which is pretty bad if you're a Trojan fan. Wisconsin and Iowa, I don't know exactly. I'd say Wisconsin probably. Iowa, I'd lean toward saying yeah. It's not that I think USC's bad. I just think they're transitioning, and I think the Big Ten, while not being full of like, I don't think Michigan or Ohio. Michigan certainly won't be as good as they were last year, and there is also a chance that Ohio State, despite being better in the tier system of college football, might be the same overall as last year. Maybe a little better, maybe a little worse. But the Big Ten is just really deep. A good question, Travis. Okay. Let me find other questions here. Okay. I don't think there are. Oh, another one from Travis. Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas, and maybe Alabama can win it. Georgia goes to Ole Miss and Texas this year, right? Yes, they do. Um, the That's it. There's a lot of comments, and I thank you for all the comments, but there were not many. There were not many questions tonight. So that's it. Thank you, DJ, for coming on and for talking and for showing your analysis and for joining this program. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks for having me. Anytime you need me back, just let me know.
All right, we'll do. I think it would be good. Um, yeah, I have a few ideas, but we'll definitely stay in touch. I'm gonna end the stream and then we can talk a little bit afterward. Thank you guys for coming on,
You
and
mind if I
I'll
give a shout out?
yeah, of course.
Okay. Just wanted to say if anybody wanna find me, you can find me at AAA Sports Podcast. Me and a couple of my friends will be on Facebook. I believe we got the Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Also, if you're in the Youngstown area, especially in the Pittsburgh area, you need to move. Get with Full Faith Moving Services or Moving on Faith. They'll hook you up. Tell them DJ sent you.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming on here.